Is there a balm in Gilead? If we were to ask the imperial powers of this world, the answer would be no. I just saw a documentary film about former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld titled The Unknown Known. The film consists primarily of Mr. Rumsfeld sitting in a room all by himself with just a plain blue wall behind him, speaking to an off-camera interviewer about his many years serving various presidents' administrations. And they trace his history through Rumsfeld, many memos, which he numbers in the hundreds of thousands. In the movie, he describes a memo that he wrote to President Reagan when he was serving as special envoy to the Middle East, where Gilead was located in Jordan. He wrote to President Reagan that Rumsfeld himself would never urge Reagan to work for lasting peace in the Middle East because life had taught him that it was about three things: conflict, betrayal, and war. Apparently, he did not believe in a balm for Gilead. Rumsfeld wrote another famous memo for President George W. Bush when he was Secretary of Defense. The subject line was, "What we know." He wrote to the president, "There are known knowns, the things that we know that we know. There are known unknowns, the things that we know we don't know, such as we know the enemy is hidden, but we don't know where he's hiding. There are the unknown unknowns, the things that we don't know that we don't know. And there are the unknown knowns, the things that we think we know, but we don't actually know." The things, he says, that worry the Secretaries of Defense are the unknowns. According to Rumsfeld, we are in danger when there are too many unknowns. How might the enemy come at us? We don't know. And the way to figure out the unknown unknowns and the unknown knowns is to quote Barney, use our imaginations. He called Pearl Harbor a failure of imagination. Had we done a better job of imagining all the possible ways we could be attacked, we could have neutralized or eliminated those possibilities so that the imagined unknowns didn't happen. So, for example, we should imagine that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction and then overthrow the ruler and the country just in case. Or we should imagine that Japanese American citizens during World War II were threats to national security and imprison them in Manzanar. This is the kind of world orientation that has come to arrest Jesus. It is a world orientation based on fear and paranoia, protection and self-defense. It values self-preservation above all else. A large detachment of soldiers and temple police arrive with weapons and torches, and their fear is obvious. When Jesus affirms for the first time that he is Jesus of Nazareth, they step back and fall to the ground in fear. They're a well-armed militia, and they're afraid of an unarmed man? They're crippled by their fear of the unknown. And what they fail to realize, what is the unknown known to them, is that in their struggles to maintain power and serve their own fears, they invariably harm one of their own party. This is what happens in Gethsemane. The only person injured in the garden that night is Malchus, the slave of the high priest. Malchus, as a slave, was compelled to accompany the temple priest, the temple police. He probably bore no ill will toward Jesus or the disciples, and yet he loses his ear when Peter reacts in fear and a misguided desire to protect Jesus and probably himself. Notice that Jesus strikes out at Malchus right after Jesus says, "Let these men go." Both Peter and Jesus imagine that the disciples are in danger. And so Peter strikes out at the most vulnerable and probably the least armed man in that arresting party that night. The injury to the slave Malchus appears in all four gospel accounts of the arrest of Jesus, but only in the Gospel of John is Malchus accorded the dignity of a name. In all four Gospels, Jesus objects to the violence done to Malchus. In fact, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus reaches out and heals Malchus's ear. Rather than attempting to preserve his own life, Jesus protects the lives of everybody else in that garden that night. He doesn't take sides. He protects his disciples by telling the soldiers to let them go. And yet he also protects Malchus and perhaps even the soldiers from further injury by telling Peter, "Put down that sword." Jesus would say that the violence done to Malchus and to him is happening due to a failure of imagination. His enemies have imagined the wrong thing about him. They've imagined that he is a weapon of mass destruction, when in reality, Jesus is the antidote to weapons of mass destruction. What makes Jesus frightening to people intent on destroying him are the unknowns. They can't figure him out. They don't know what they don't know. Who is this man? They're so confused in his presence that he has to prod them twice to ask whom they're looking for. He has to urge them to take him in. Or perhaps the imperial and religious leaders think they know what he is, a political revolutionary, but they don't really know what he truly is. They lack the imagination to understand that love is more powerful than hatred and self-preservation. They lack the imagination to believe in a world order in which violence is discarded. They lack the imagination to see the God incarnate in the person of Jesus. And ironically, there is something they don't know that we in Jesus do know. There's incredible dramatic irony here, the kind of irony that occurs when the readers know something that the players don't know. Jesus needs Judas to betray him. He needs the local leaders to fail in their imagination so that his death and resurrection can occur. This is the cup he must drink for their benefit and ours. But Malchus was not meant to be harmed. Peter thinks he knows what he's supposed to do, protect Jesus and perhaps himself, but he's imagined the wrong thing. For that reason, he engages in the one act of violence that was not meant to happen that night, the severing of Malchus's ear. That's why Jesus objects to the violence. He values the life of Malchus, a slave, as much as he values the life of anyone else in Gethsemane that night. While surrounded by soldiers that he knows will eventually kill him, Jesus shows concern not for his body, but for the body of Malchus. Rather than be self-absorbed, he protects Malchus. In Luke's version, he even heals Malchus. What a beautiful world that Jesus inhabits. It's so different from the world of self-defense and the ranking of human beings by wealth, race, gender, ability. In slave-holding societies, a slave is of no account. He or she can be injured or killed with no penalty. Why isn't Peter arrested for assault? It's because Malchus is a slave. Why did Peter strike out at Malchus? Probably because it was the least risky person. There's this famous passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 53 and following, called the suffering servant. And it says, "He was despised, and we held him of no account." That passage is often cited in Holy Week as a reference to Jesus, the slaughtered lamb. But it also applies to Malchus, because Malchus is the only person held of no account in this passage. The only person that nobody else is bothering to protect is Malchus. If the soldiers and the police were incensed at Malchus's injury, they would have struck Peter. But they don't, because Malchus's body is not valuable to them. Only the self-preservation of the ruling class is important to them. There are painful parallels in our own society of bodies that are valued less than others. The killing of Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, Troy Davis, the mass arrests and incarceration and execution of people of color in our country shows us that we still need this African American spiritual from the days of slavery. There is a balm in Gilead. As we contemplate Jesus' arrest for a crime he was imagined to commit, we should remember to seek justice for those who are unjustly imprisoned, unjustly executed. We should remember that at the moment when his own body was most threatened, Jesus ignored self-preservation and showed great love for everybody, including the most marginalized person in that garden, Malchus. Jesus was a secretary of love, not a secretary of defense, and he calls us to throw away our defenses and self-preservation and be secretaries of love too. With his divine perception, it's easier for him to know what's going to happen. There are no unknowns for Jesus. He knows the cup he's been given to drink. He knows the truth that his death and resurrection will convey to the world, that peace and security come from self-giving love, not from self-preserving defenses. The imagination that asks, what's the worst that somebody can do to us, leads to destruction for everybody involved, even, eventually, the people in power. Those religious authorities lost their temple in Jerusalem in 70 years, and the Roman Empire gradually disintegrated over the next few hundred years. But the reign of Jesus never ends. That is because Jesus' imagination does not ask, what's the worst that someone can do to me? He asks, how can I show the greatest love possible? The imagination that asks, what's the best that I can do for another, or how can I show the greatest love, leads to a flourishing of life and redemption. That type of imagination creates endless possibilities of love, collaboration, healing, and justice. On the other hand, the imagination fixated on what is the worst that somebody can do to me, what don't I know that I don't know, becomes this inward turning spiral of paranoia, competition, and self-preservation. And then it explodes outward, and it causes collateral damage. It hurts the least of the people of little account in society. These are the people who live too close to the drones bombing targets, are undocumented immigrants, a black teenaged boy armed with a bag of Skittles. It perpetuates the anti-Semitism that led to the shooting of 3 people in Kansas last week, 2 outside a Jewish community center, and 1 outside a retirement home called the Villa Shalom. It attacks people who threaten the established power structures. It takes sides. It forms teams against other teams. Jesus takes no sides today, and he bids us to take no sides either, but to love one another as God loves us. He imagines the peacemaker and the healer in all of us. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he demonstrates how true godliness looks outward, not inward, and reaches out to help those that we have held of no account, to heal the ear of Malchus. And then he dies on the cross in part to convert us all from secretaries of defense into secretaries of love. As the Apostle Paul writes, the cross seems like foolishness, and Christianity can seem naive, like something we've imagined. Well, imagine that. They may say we are dreamers, but we're not the only ones. Before serving as a Secretary of Defense for President Bush, Mr. Rumsfeld was the chairman of a pharmaceutical company. This pharmaceutical company manufactured medications for the treatment of HIV and hepatitis B. And the name of Mr. Rumsfeld's company? Gilead Sciences. Mr. President, there is a bomb in Gilead, and let's manufacture some more of it.